Hello and welcome. I am Ali from the Future Hospitality Summit and Branded Residences Forum team, and I have a very special guest with me today. We have Eleonora Srugo, who is star of Netflix's Selling the City, as most of you may already know, and she's also a superstar at Douglas Elliman as a real estate broker. Welcome, Eleonora.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be coming.
So is this going to be your first time in
It
Dubai,
is my
Eleonora?
first time. Yeah, it is my first and very long anticipated first time in Dubai. Yes, I'm extending the trip. Just FYI, this is not. I'm so grateful for you guys having me, but this is going to be a long overdue vacation as well.
Well, we're thrilled and we're so excited as well. For those who don't know, why don't you tell us where you're based and what you do?
I'm based in New York City. Manhattan to be specific. I grew up here. It's my hometown. And I work at Douglas Elliman, which is really the preeminent residential brokerage firm in New York City. It's certainly the largest in terms of reach. I have been at the company. This is my 16th year. And I'm currently at our flagship, the Midtown location, which is on 57th and Madison Avenue. I've been here almost the entire time. There's a secondary office downtown Manhattan in Tribeca, which is where we filmed Selling the City, which is the Netflix show that, was fun. It came out in January of 2025. So I guess now I do real estate and a little bit of television stuff. You were also going to be a little bit on Selling Sunset, which is the first, the sister show that we have that comes out in October. And yeah, I try to do, I mostly do real estate. Obviously, that's my career. I do a little bit of, other work in terms of trying to be helpful in the fabric of New York City and what that means for our future. I see myself as a real estate agent. We are not just the eternal optimists, but we have a vested interest in sort of the success of every market that we're in. Otherwise, we don't really have a product to sell. So any way that I can be sort of useful to New York as it hopefully in many ways stays a beloved city, but also has shifted over the years especially, in the global landscape.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about branded residences because part of your participation in this October's event in Dubai will be with the Branded Residences Forum, and we're obviously excited to get that New York angle and perspective from your expertise. But as an asset for investors, what makes branded real estate or branded residences so compelling?
Branded residences, it's so interesting. It is one of those things that unites the world. It sort of is something that everyone can relate to, wherever they may come from. In my market specifically, we at a high point had about 26% international buyers. Now it's a little bit lower, but it fluctuates a bit. Brand recognition is obviously a very important thing. It allows you to participate in a product where there's a name that theoretically would already be familiar to you. There's sort of a sense of trust and experiential understanding of what the product or lifestyle means and what the representation is. But I think truly more than anything is, even when I started in real estate, I think that there were a lot of emerging markets and emerging cities, but if you were looking at really expensive metropolitan cities that people lived in and wanted to have second homes in around the world, you were really just talking about London and New York. And that conversation has shifted so much, obviously, with cities like Dubai, but obviously, Singapore, Hong Kong, Beijing, and even in the US, look at LA and Miami in terms of their price points and global reach, and even Aspen. And so branded residences in a way allow you to sort of tie all those markets together or have some sort of consistency and uniformity across all of those regions. Obviously, you still will find a way to navigate the needs and interests of whatever that sort of local market is. But there's an expectation that there will be a familiar sense, at least of the level of sort of quality and experience once you have a branded residence. It's interesting to see. I mean, it's certainly, it is evolving. It's sort of evolving from a space where branded residences were always very specific to hospitality. But now they sort of crossbreed and have really gone into sort of every level of the luxury experience, right? And so, especially in these sort of newer emerging markets, New York is, I would say, still a traditionalist, but we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, that's interesting because we look at the market like Dubai, and then investor preferences can be a little different in the Middle East. Um, what kind of investor do you see?
Well,
What differences do you see in these
preferences
regions?
could be different, but it's so, it's fascinating. If you look at wealth and culture around the world, there are a lot of similarities when it comes to wealth, right? So if you were to look at a lower income household in South America or the Middle East, Asia, the United States, you would find that so many things would be different about what they did, where they vacationed, what they like to do for fun or pleasure, what they eat, how they dress. You would find real significant differences. But if you go to sort of the uppermost echelons of wealth and high net worth, and you were to find a very wealthy person from South America and the Middle East and the United States and Asia, you would actually find a lot more similarities. There would be a lot of brands that they probably all like to wear and enjoy, and restaurants or dining experiences that are all sort of familiar to them, events around the world that they all like to go to, whether it's, an F1 or a soccer game or whatever. So there's actually a lot more uniformity and a lot of things that bring culture together at the higher price point sort of the market. And so same goes for living. Of course, there are going to be some minor adjustments, but in terms of lifestyle, you can actually have a lot more in common. You find that we have a lot more in common when you're looking at that sort of level of service. What in terms of diversity, is that sort of the focus? Yeah, I wanted to add. It's interesting. I've seen this firsthand. Yeah, there's certainly a shift. I think the shift in wealth around the world has certainly, changed what people traditionally believe is sort of like the face of the buyer or wealth and what their needs are. I think it's changed how people are building, developers, specifically in the United States. In my market, the percentage of women that are buying has gone up significantly. I mean, that's probably, if you want to talk about diversity, obviously we have a big we have a large market segment that's international. And so we have to sort of have a more culturally open understanding. It's New York City. But I think the biggest shift has been with gender and also with age. A lot of sort of newer wealth form, over the pandemic, specifically with like cryptocurrency and things like that, have definitely brought sort of the age gap and the age range down, and then certainly with gender. And I think you see that just in how sort of newer residences and developers who are building for those constituents, how they're building and sort of what they know that they need to sort of appeal to in terms of like design.
No, that's excellent because that was going to be my next question. As you being a trailblazing woman in New York's competitive market space, how do you see diversity and leadership shaping, especially the brand residences area globally? I guess you've half answered that question
Yeah.
already, but feel free to
Yeah.
add.
Of course, I think with branded residences, again, New York is still traditionalist in that our branded residences come from the hospitality space. And obviously real estate industry is still a very male dominated industry, but there are incredibly successful women who have positioned themselves throughout, whether it's in the sort of residential or transactional side, um, and who've really become pioneers in getting their voices heard and having an impact. I work on sort of the consumer facing level, right? So I see the actual people who are buying apartments, and I, fully understand that, you know, more often than not, there are people, there's more than one person who's part of this decision making process. Buying a home is a decision making process that, for a first home or a smaller price point is individual, but as the price points go higher, this actually becomes a shared decision making process. It's not one that's ever done in isolation, and most of the time it's couples or families, and so there's actually a lot more influence from women in terms of buying, whether it's their capital or not. They're certainly a major component of the decision making process, and I think that uh, developers, whether it's a branded residence or not, have certainly had to adjust to those needs and desires in how they're approaching both the marketing, right, the design, and everything. There's no way to say that just because sort of the wealth has a gender gap, that that decision has a gender gap. It doesn't. It's usually, in fact, I would say more often than not, I'll work with a couple who, of all the things to argue with your wife about, the apartment's not going to be one of them. So you let her have a pretty big say. So I think that is sort of an important component that, we can obviously look at where the capital and the wealth is coming from, but we also have to understand that sort of on the more human level and on the consumer facing part, there is no gender gap, right?
Well, let's talk for a second about moving away from individuals or ultra high net worth individuals, I should say, to institutional investors. Do you see that area also picking interest into branded residences as an asset type? Is that an area that you have to deal with sometimes?
I think institutional investors get a lot of sort of comfort and interest. But look, there have been, and it depends. There's people have to be very flexible and open these days with branded residences. I think that it doesn't quite look the way that it used to look. There have been enough failed projects to sort of know where, I think there's been enough failed projects where people can be a little bit trepidatious, but certainly there are enough that have really changed the industry for the better. I think institutional investors certainly there's an appeal to sort of branded residences, maybe already having a pretty significant client base. I think that's part of it. I think there's an assurance sort of that this is a proven model that can work. I think, yeah, I think that there's an alignment there. And then more often than not, and this surprises me when I meet with institutional investors, is that they're not so stoic about it. They have a personal invested interest in some of these brands. I mean, I can't tell you, especially big developers are sort of, these are people who travel, who consider themselves purveyors and curators of sort of good taste and experiences. And they have pretty strong opinions on the brands that they like or that they think are, better or nicer or or a step above in terms of what they offer and design. And they're also sort of enthusiasts about certain brands. And so that is the one thing that I find surprising when I sort of meet with institutional investors and the brands that they're trying to sort of source for their projects, is that it's pretty personal to them, actually.
Eleonora, look, I don't want to take away all of your talking points from the
Okay.
actual conference, and I'm
Well, a
sure
lot
lots
can
of
change, and a lot can
our
change
audience.
in 2 months, I guess.
A lot.
So,
That's true. That's true. And it keeps changing,
yeah.
doesn't it? And I'm sure people still want to have plenty of things to discuss with you in Dubai in a couple months. But since we touched upon brands, I think one question I do have for you is your perspective on non-hospitality fashion brands or automotive brands in the luxury space entering this brand residency space. How is it viewed from someone coming from your background as a real estate broker in the established New York market. How do you see this?
Yeah, I find those collaborations to be actually some of the most exciting in this space. Um, and I'll tell you why. Well, first of all, the one thing that I would say probably is the most important thing for a brand to think about, is the developer, the quality of the project, the sort of integration of the brand more holistically, other than just sort of like the lending of the name. Um, you know, Quality control and construction is incredibly important, but I think also just sort of like on operation and service and, the anticipation that everything sort of feels uniform. Um, it's certainly different for lifestyle sort of clothing, maybe even technology or car brands, because they're not they're not in a space of sort of living. But I think that as you look at sort of how people live, especially sort of like health, wellness, beauty, I mean, those I think are some of the most important aspects of sort of lifestyle and day-to-day life. So whereas a hospitality brand can partner with the residents and, theoretically offer the same aesthetic or, hopefully similar concierge services, bedding, I think where a health or wellness and beauty brand can really help in terms of sort of like building amenities or sort of design in terms of construction, sound insulation, and air purification. I just think that there's so much more that sort of a wellness brand can contribute to the space. Um, it's different. There's also I had a recently I worked with a branded residences where there was a chef involved, a well-known chef. That was also a really fascinating collaboration. It was a kitchen really designed by a sort of culinary master, and it was incredibly thoughtful with a sort of he said to me, if you go to a kitchen and it's all the appliances come from one brand, then no one really cared about it. And so we came in and literally picked different appliances from different brands, which is not something common in buildings, right? Usually you buy sort of the appliance package from one brand, and really thoughtful about sort of when you're cooking, and and you're entertaining, when your back is turned to them, you having more sort of island space when you're facing people, and sort of cooking. No one wanted to cook with their back to others, and storage, and really things that I had never thought about in the space. And kitchen tools and appliances that were very different. It was a great sort of selling point, especially just and in the aspirational place. Same thing goes for a gym. When you're designing a gym, you don't ever want to sort of choose all the same gym equipment, right? Someone who really thinks about the things that would be helpful. And then the only other thing that I would say is that, yeah, you can, there's also opportunities for sort of more cross branding or sort of multiple collaborations together. And so I think that has become really interesting. At this point, I think anything goes with a branded residence. There's obviously a market for it. You look at places like Miami where they have, nightclubs co-branding residences, and those seem to work and they sell incredibly well. Look, nothing can replace, obviously, a unique location and a good product. And, the greatest brand you have is the quality and of the experience itself. That obviously goes the furthest, in sort of building a reputation. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of sort of exciting ways to do branded collaborations, maybe not, holistically for all of the residences, but for portions of the residences, like, the kitchen design or, maybe a bedroom design specifically from one sort of brand versus another, or a, right, like you said, how great would it be to have a branded residences with sort of a high-end fashion brand having designed all the closets, for example, right? Like those are those are great ideas that I think are much more sort of practical, and allow you to have sort of control over what it is you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's lots of exciting things happening and lots more to be discussed in a few weeks when we'll have you on stage with us in Dubai at
I'll be
the
there
Future
every single
Hospitality
day, all
Summit.
day, walking around.
Perfect. And we'll have some of these brands there as well. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting insights further to the ones you've shared with us today. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy, and we really appreciate the insights that you've shared in the lead up
Of
to the
course,
event.
appreciate you having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.